I do want to introduce Shannon to you for those of you who know her or don't know her. Shannon was good enough to send me her CV, and so I learned much more about her than I ever knew before this. But Shannon has been with us since 1989 with a short break there from 89 on. She is currently a full professor in the Department of English. She's been the director / assistant director for faculty development on 2 different occasions. Once again, for those of you who are not aware, Shannon's background, educational background, did a bachelor's at Dalhousie, and then she went west along with the oil rig workers to Alberta, and did a master's and a PhD at the University of Alberta. She's, I think most of you are aware as well, that Shannon, as a reflection of her excellence in pedagogy and scholarship of teaching, was awarded a 3M National Scholarship in 2001. I just want to read you a couple of her addresses, conference addresses, as well as her publications, to get a sense that for somebody who, like Shannon, who thinks through these things, it's multidimensional in terms of how you actually address topics related to engagement. It's not just sort of from one perspective. So let me just give you a sense of some of the things she's done here. There was a publication called Teaching Large Classes, and there's a number of presentations and publications on, I guess, in the pedagogy of teaching large classes. There was another one that was entitled End with a Bang, Not a Whimper, 12 Ways to Engage Students on the Last Day of Classes. A presentation called Inching Towards Utopia, the example of a first-year learning community. The more we teach together, the happier we'll be. Should I say that sort of in a...
You can sing that.
Okay. The Scholarship of Teaching and Community. And finally, In My End is My Beginning, 4 Principles for Academic Closure. So I point that out because for those people like Shannon and some of the other people we're bringing in over the next few weeks and months, I think you'll find that that is a common thread, that when they're involved in pedagogy and the scholarship of teaching, it doesn't just emerge in just one way. It emerges in a number of different ways and how they think that through. And so I think that's one of the things we have to learn from them as well. And so I'll just end right there and just turn it over to Shannon. I won't even introduce the topic. I'll leave that up to you, Shannon. So with that, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. I'm glad we have that on tape. I love the idea of my scholarship being varied rather than not actually having a focus, which is how it looks sometimes. I like your take on it a lot better, Jim. Thank you. I actually want to start with some thanks. Thanks for starting the series. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for dialogue about things that matter to all of us. I also have to thank the Putting Students First grants, because it's with one of those grants that I put this together based on the senior year experience with the help of Martha Ann Uni. And it's on her work that I'm going to base a lot of what I'm talking about today. She's one of our 4th-year students last year. And I also need to thank Jane McGrath, with whom I designed a 4th-year capstone course and taught it for 2 wonderful years. And so it's really Martha's work and Jane's work that I'm going to build on here, or rather, I'm going to steal from. This is my poster boy for my talk. How does he look?
Nervous.
Nervous. What else? Confused. Tight-lipped. Scared. What else do you see? Frustration. He's scared. That's it. Yep. I went up to our 4th-year lounge a little while ago and I said, okay, this is Brian Ansems. He is a 4th-year student. And I said, Brian, okay, you're coming to the end of your 4 years at UPEI. Actually, it's probably 5.5 years at UPEI. You're looking forward to the rest of your life. Pull that face. And that's the face he pulled. And I thought, that's pretty good. Because even though a lot of our students, most of our students, of course, they're excited about coming to the end of the degrees. They're proud of themselves. Some of them are even relieved that they're getting it out of the way. But for a lot of them, there's also quite reasonably that sense of anxiety, of confusion, even of fear. I'm going to talk today about something that I've become really excited about in the last few years, and that's the senior year experience. And I do want to say right at the outset that I don't think that our primary job should be in getting rid of that anxiety or that fear. I'm going to talk about using it. Because I think when our students are in this state, that's a really powerful and potent moment for learning. We talk about teachable moments, right? That rolls off our tongue. This is an entire teachable year, and that's a teachable face. So this afternoon, in one way or another, I'm going to talk about what the senior year experience is, why it matters, and I hope we'll be able to get to what it might look like at UPEI if we were going to take it even further than we already have. Before I go on, though, I should probably deal with a couple of questions first. The first is, what do I mean by the senior year? Perhaps somewhere back in the utopian old days, there was an easy way to find and group our fourth-year students, our senior about-to-graduate students, but we know that's not the case anymore. We know that it's about 5.5 years, isn't it now, the average time that someone in Canada takes to get a first degree? So finding that fourth year with a diversity of students, some of whom are mature students coming back, they're taking things part-time, they stop out, they come back, captivating that group, figuring out where they are and what to do with them can be a real challenge. So what people who talk about the senior year experience normally say is we're talking about a group who are within, from our perspective, 10 courses of the end of their degree. So it may be 2 years before they're going to graduate, or 3, or a half a year, but they're within that period. That's the group that we're looking for. The other question, and this is one that I've been wrangling with a bit, is this something that really could work across disciplines? And I think yes. I think the principles that I'm going to talk about today for the senior year experience do work. Whether you're in the arts or whether you're in a professional program, they work across disciplines. I think, in fact, that some professional schools, and particularly those faculties that work by cohort models, probably do a lot of what we'll talk about today already and well. And I do think that for the arts, and maybe, I'll hear about this later, for the sciences as well, these principles are absolutely essential. Because our students in arts, and we've been hearing about this week as we have decadal candidates coming in, our students are the ones who really have been the beneficiaries of an interesting principle in learning. And that principle is primarily variety. It's choice. And so what we think of as a senior student or a fourth-year student could be taking first-year courses in the fourth year, third year, second year. So we've built a degree really around the principle of choice and variety. And that means that we have, or at least I did as an undergraduate, largely the bingo model of the arts degree, which is you get to 40 courses, you yell bingo, and you get your degree. It's the counting up of the courses that matters. There's not a sense for us in arts of moving towards an end, of a closure, of a conclusion that's built into this program. So I'll suggest that these principles work and are important across disciplines. They are imperative in the arts. And the last question I'll ask, which is a very self-serving one, is why don't universities do this better? I gave a talk on this a few years ago, and my very unscientific way of showing that we don't do this very well was to Google first-year experience and senior year experience. And at the time, there were 20 times more hits for first-year experience. Isn't that great, Vicki? Than there were for senior year experience. Now it's actually a little closer, but still considerably less research, considerably fewer programs or courses that are devoted to the senior year transition than to the first-year transition. And I want to argue that the senior year transition is a tougher one than the transition into university or into college. The students who are about to leave us have been in school, many of them, for 16 years or 18 years. And this is what they know. And they're going to something completely different. At least our students coming from high school to university are still within an educational experience. But this is a huge jump that our students are taking. And so it's important that we pay attention to it. So why don't we? I suspect that the kind of diversity I was just talking about, who is a senior student, would this work across disciplines when by the time students get to their senior year, they're deep in very separate kinds of experiences? How do we pull them all together in some kind of common experience? That's a problem. There might be a practical problem too. I don't know how, practical, that's the right word for it. Because when we're worried about the transition into university, we're worried about keeping our students, right? Making them successful, yes, but retention, hanging on to them is important, and there's a good financial as well as altruistic reason for that. But when we're talking about the senior year experience, there may be less of a sense of emergency about it, because frankly, we don't want to hang on to them, we want them gone, right? We want them off into the rest of their lives. And so that sense of emergency, we have to figure out what to do with our senior students, might be gone. Of course, when people are talking about why we have to do this, and they're speaking to perhaps reluctant university administrators, this is sometimes a good argument. Every university recognizes the importance of building a strong and supportive alumni, right? And this is our last chance, that senior year. But of course, that's not the only reason to do it. We want to do it because this is an important moment in the lives of our students, because it's our last attempt at it, and because, frankly, when these students go off into the world, they're going to speak well or ill of the university experience, and we want them to speak well. So, I think there's one other reason that we may have difficulty with it, why there's not more done with the senior year experience, and that is that endings are hard. I find beginnings easier. I do really good first classes. 9 out of 10 times, I do really awful last classes. And there are all kinds of reasons for that, right? I'm tired at the end of the term. Well, our students are tired at the end of 4 years. There are all kinds of reasons why endings are hard. But I think that actually paying attention to the last class as a kind of metaphor for the last year or for the senior year is helpful. When I think back to my own undergraduate education, I must say, I'm not sure I was a terribly engaged student a lot of the time. I don't remember a lot. That's probably a bad sign, isn't it, from my undergraduate education. But I do remember one class in particular. It was a first-year philosophy class. And it was a model of what you can do when of how active a lecture class could be. 2 professors team taught the whole class, and they taught it as an argument. They went through all the great philosophical problems, and they argued their way through it. And it was just fascinating to watch. The last class is still, for me, the most memorable ending I could imagine. And I want my last classes to be like this one. We probably did a review. I don't remember any of that. If we did, looking for the exam, probably. But then we made them talk about which side of each philosophical argument they were actually on. We made them fess up. Do you believe in God or not? Are you a determinist? What do you think about euthanasia? What do you really think? So that even though they were arguing a position all the way through, we really wanted to know what they thought. But then Terry Tomko, who was teaching and apparently is now making lots of money in software somewhere, took a copy of T.S. Eliot's 4 Quartets and waving it while he was reading, he said what the value in what we were doing was, why any of this mattered. And he read from it and he gesticulated at the same time, and we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive at the place for the first time and know it for the first time. And he talked about flames and roses and tongues enfolding, and the flame and the rose will be one. Wow, that was it. And I left knowing what I was going to do next. I was going to switch to philosophy because that was wonderful. And my English class was really dull. And I think what we had there was a real sense of what endings can do. It was closure. It was a sense of what we'd shared together. But it was also that next step. So what are we going to run out and do? I'll switch to philosophy, obviously. I think the key for me was that he was reading a poem. That probably brought me back into English again. But I've always wanted to do a last class like that. Make the ending count. So what I'm wondering is, what do you do in your last classes? This, by the way, is the last class from my class in December in Cairo. These are my sweet students about whom I have been thinking a lot over the last week or so. So I'm going to ask you now to pair up, or as Yogi Berra used to say, pair up in threes if you prefer, and talk about last classes. What do you do in a last class? Or what has been done to you, Marlies, in a last class that you like? What makes a good last class? So will you take a couple of minutes, please, for a chat? Of course, this is a much bigger topic. And Brian has a wonderful publication on last classes, by the way, too, and Teaching Professor, if you'd like to have a look at it. What did you come up with? What do you like to do or like to have done to you in a final class? Marlies.
The idea of integration, bringing everything that you've learned together, and also giving it like a practical, like kind of, I don't know, connotation with it, make it usable for us. I mean, outside of the classroom, like you were talking about the other day in class, we learn these skills, but just because we don't use them all the time or are conscious of using them all the time, we are, and just placing value on those skills.
Yes.
Rather than just saying, oh, this is the exam, here you go, bye.
Good. So something that both pulls everything together, integrates, and also makes it useful, suggests what's going to happen next. And this is not a plant. That's very good. Thank you. Other thoughts? What else do you like to do? Brian.
Well, I do something that, well, you're well aware because we do FTSI, but I taught the last class and the first class because in the first class I do expectations.
Yeah.
I asked them to, on an index card to write down what their expectations are for the course, what they hope to learn, what they hope to get out of it, what they hope to discover.
Yeah.
And in that first class I collect them, shuffle them, and then redistribute them so they can be randomly read.
Yeah.
And then we have a discussion in that first class about, yes, this is something we probably will cover, or no, this is probably not, maybe not.
Yeah.
But then I bring them back to the last class and shuffle them and give them out again and have people read it. And then we talk, well, did we do this?
Yeah.
Was this something that we managed to accomplish? That generates a lot of really good discussion. And again,
Yeah.
as you're saying, students think, oh yes, we did do that. And oh yeah, we actually learned how to do this thing, or,
Yeah.
and so on. So I think that tying the last class and the first class is very, very beneficial.
Yeah.
And then we also talked about, well, what's next? After this class,
Yeah.
where are you going next? And are you finished? And Don had an interesting idea. He talks about he always finds out from in the class how many students is this your very last class.
Aha. Aha.
That's a very interesting idea.
Yes. There's a moment, eh?
It right away puts a little bit of a spirit of celebration into that class.
Yes.
If there is anyone that's in our last class.
Yes, that's lovely. So that sense of celebration at the end. Brian, I like yours. It goes with my poem, doesn't it? Yeah, we go back to the beginning again. That's right. What else? What else do you do?
Effort at celebration, I don't feel a sense that we've gotten the kind of celebration that sort of started
Yes.
I'm just not sure why. Part of it, I think, is because although in the last class, often, usually, there's a lot left to happen.
Yes.
Of course, with either a final paper or an exam and so on.
Yes.
And as we get to that last class, sometimes the distance between the role of student and mark giver gets exacerbated. So
That's right.
it's a little tough to, or I haven't found a way to bring about that celebratory moment.
And that happens if there's an exam. What happens if there isn't an exam? Students might not come. It's the do they come to the last class? Yeah. Thank you. Jim, you.
Well, I was just going to say that it depends on how lazy I am. If I'm lazy,
Yeah.
then the last class gets taken over by the summary and preparation for the final exam.
Yeah.
And that's almost rote. You sort of take it's almost transactional. These are the things we study. If I'm not as lazy, then I'll think through the big questions that I had hoped we'd covered in the class and have a discussion on those. And so I guess ideal, especially if you've got a 2 or 3 hour class,
Yeah.
is you break into those two components.
Good. So you do have the review, the looking back, but then what's the big question? What are the big issues? Lovely. One more? Charlene.
I teach an upper division political science class during the summer and
Yeah.
have small class sizes. And from the very beginning, our focus is that we are going to submit a research paper that will go to the Attorney General's office. They have to decide early what their topic is going to be.
Yeah.
And then they will, the last two classes are set aside for those, for the students to present. And there's enough time allotted for them to have discussion.
Okay. So that really is a wrapping up of a major project that they've done, but that also looks outside the classroom. Wonderful. In fact, we've raised some of the wonderful things, but also the issue of the difficulty of managing that last class too. It seems to me that most of the things that we've talked about involve the same principles that work with the senior year. And John Gardner now at the National Center for the First Year Experience in Students in Transition, and he used to be at South Carolina, which gives us the home of the first year experience as well, has talked about those 4 as principles for the senior year experience. But haven't we just been talking about them with the last class as well? Integration. Yeah, you pull everything together. You might have been studying it separately, but now what does it all mean? What are those big questions? Looking back. Reflection. I didn't hear so much of that coming from you, but when I was eavesdropping, I did. Just asking students about how they've changed in their thinking. So get them to think about not only what they've learned, but how they've learned it. Transition, that's anything that takes you into the next step. And it might be beyond the classroom, but it might be also into the next class that you have, right, with the final class. And a sense of closure, wrapping things up. Now, I like to change that one sometimes. I like to change it to celebration. So that the 4 principles for me are integration, reflection, transition, and celebration. And that's not just because the Murray clan motto is any excuse for a party. It's actually because it dovetails nicely with something else that I really feel strongly about. Ernest Boyer some time ago put out a wonderful little book on campus life. What makes a good and healthy campus community? He says there are 6 principles. A good campus community is purposeful, just, and open, disciplined, caring, and celebrative. So I've stolen the celebrative from there too. I wonder how we're doing. That'd be a good brown bag lunch, wouldn't it? But I digress. When we're talking about celebration or closure and the final year, the senior year experience, well, actually universities are not bad at this, at least in one way. How many universities exist that don't have a convocation committee or a graduation ceremony or a senior week or a senior class? That's pretty much what every university will do. But I don't think that either the celebration or that sense of closure should depend on that week. For one thing, not all our students go, right? And because it's wonderful, it's good for the parents, and I love convocation. I go every year. But we should be looking, John Gardner tells us, for other opportunities in the senior year to celebrate, to recognize, to introduce ritual. Some campuses have a last lecture. You've probably been hearing about that. Others have a series of celebrations, of get-togethers, of socials through the year for seniors. One place has a disorientation week near the end of the last term. I love that. So you have an orientation week at the beginning, a disorientation week to take you out into the world after that. So absolutely, I believe in the importance of convocation and that week's celebration. But we should be celebrating, looking for any excuse for a party, all the way through that last year. We can even do it in individual classes, right? I often think about our honors students, and for a while in English we had an honors defense, then we didn't have it, and now we have it again. And it doesn't really affect our students' final marks. What it gives them is a sense of closure, right? Of wrapping up, of really feeling as if they've done something. So those, Marlise is my honor student. It's a really good experience, Marlise, and it's worth it.
I will take your word for this.
Anxiety is good. That's a teachable moment. So that's one of the principles. The second is reflection, and I really think that, of course, we should be doing this all the way through education. That we need to give our students a space to stop and think about what they've done, how they've changed, how they've learned. All of those things matter. And we can do that in individual classes. It's imperative that we do it for senior students. They need to have space to recognize what it is that they've got and how it is that they've changed. I think about the capstone course that Jane and I taught, and we asked what seemed like quite an innocent question at one point. How have you changed from your first-year self to your fourth-year self? And one student, Sarah Baird, she's now in education, burst out with, everything's changed. I'm completely different. And I think often if you give students the chance to think about, well, what did I feel like when I first came in? Even to look back at their assignments. How did you write back then? What were you doing? How has your thinking changed? Give them those opportunities, and they'll be readier. They'll be readier for that conclusion. So reflection matters. But this is the one that I'm most excited about. The idea of pulling things together in that fourth year. I think if we make a mistake in university education, it's the courses. It's the separation of learning. And it must be almost 100 years ago now that John Dewey complained about this and said, you know, if we hand out knowledge to our students in airtight containers, when they leave us, where is that knowledge? Still in airtight containers. And we haven't gotten very far in 100 years, it seems to me, in taking the tops off those airtight containers and mixing stuff up and seeing how they connect. That's what learning communities do, right? The linking of courses, the blending of disciplines, and there are a lot more examples of first-year learning communities than there are of fourth-year learning communities. If I were the queen of the universe and had my own university, I would make the first year and the fourth year almost seamless. So that as you go in, you see the connectedness of things, you separate into the disconnects in the middle, and you get into the depths, and then you bring everything back again in the fourth year. I'm not the queen of the universe, however. And although this is the thing that I'm most interested in, my guess is that this is the thing that our students are thinking about most at this point. Certainly the ones who are coming to me desperate for letters of reference or all this, they're thinking about that transition. What's next? And I think we make a mistake if we do two things. We make a mistake if we worry too much about talking to our students about job skills. I know we do in arts. We worry about whether we're harming our nature by talking about the fact that, yes, you actually can get a good job with the kind of skills that we have. We have to hang on to what we are, but we also don't do ourselves an injustice if we talk about the really important skills that you get from a liberal education. In fact, one of the things I like to show my students, doesn't take 5 minutes, is the HRDC website in which they identify the 9 essential skills for the marketplace. I tell them, in a Shakespeare class, all right? How many of those skills are you working on at a high level in this incredibly esoteric seeming class? Reading text, document use, writing, oral communication, working with others, continuous learning, thinking skills, computer skills. You do all of those, and I can show you how to prove that you're doing them at a high level. Numeracy, maybe not. Although I do make them do meter. They have to count up syllables. That's as far as we get. So I think our students are worried about this and know, for many of us, for the liberal arts and sciences in particular, our primary purpose is not to get our students jobs. But this does matter to our students, and they matter to us. So if it matters to them, then we need to pay attention to it, and we need to help them with it. But I think for us, and this is an easier sell, of course, for us the other important thing is to recognize that transition isn't just into the world of work, it's into the rest of their lives as well. And another one of those cliches we hear all the time, lifelong learning, that's really what we want to do in that senior year. We want to make good lifelong learners. How do you do that? How do you make sure that when they leave us wanting more, curious, eager to continue to learn, not necessarily wanting to take more university classes, though that would be cool too, but instead knowing that, boy, like Socrates, I know nothing. That's what I know for sure now, and off I go. So yes, transition in terms of their work life, but transition to a life of learning that doesn't get graded or that doesn't have a classroom. How are you going to continue to develop, to learn, to be curious about the world when there isn't a classroom or a teacher making you do it? One of the nice things about that Students Come First grant is that I had Martha look at the whole of the Faculty of Arts and see what we already do for senior year students in any way. So what's available now for the senior year? But I think it wasn't even exhaustive. So what I'd like to hear now is, what do you do in your units, in your faculties, outside of the faculties across the university? What do you know that we do now that addresses the needs of senior students? What do we have for them? Yeah.
I don't know if this is new or not, but we're having an honors meeting on Friday for the people who are in honors and who are just freaking out.
Yes.
And kind of like staring at that blank computer screen. How do I do this? I've never done this before. This is really frightening. Has that been happening before, or is this something new? Okay. It's really helpful, especially
Yeah.
you get to meet other honors students who are outside of your faculty and learn about their struggles and talk.
Yeah.
It's really important.
That's two at once. One is the honors degrees, right? We do have honors degrees in a number of our disciplines. They tend to be for the best of the best, right? Not all students will do the honors degree, but we also, but rather more ad hocly, have one-offs for students at a particular time, students who are going crazy or with their honors degrees, or we have one coming up as well in the English department, but we don't always do it on, great jobs for English majors. So there's the sort of one-off kind of things. And honors. What else? Yeah.
The Bachelor of Integrated Studies has a 493 capstone course, and the Public Administration Certificate students have a special ceremony in the faculty house with iPad.
Okay, good. So a capstone course and ceremony for the graduating students. Wonderful. What else do we do? Yes, good. Awards and prizes. Do you do that inside your department, Philip?
There are a couple of psychology ones where we award them a few times that week. So
Yeah.
we award in the department.
Yeah. Now you have a class which is not specifically for senior students, but it does address a lot of those issues of the sense of closure, but also transition. It's I've forgotten the name of it now, service learning. Yes, thank you. Would you mention that?
Sure. So this is a course that would only involve maybe 12 or 15 students in a year, but the students do a community placement, and they also read original books, psychological theories, and write a series of essays integrating theoretical ideas with observational placement. So it serves a capstone experience for those students.
That's right. Yeah. Good, thank you. Others?
I think it's easier, as you said at the beginning of the performance,
Yeah.
because we have quite a long celebration of things for the final graduating nursing students,
Yes.
and banquets, and they have many parties. So I think it is quite different, though. These people have been together before.
Yes. Yeah, but that's good. Banquet, celebrations, parties. Biology has a banquet, doesn't it, for its students? It used to.
A lot of the departments have a celebratory
Yeah.
ending to graduation. One of the things I was going to mention,
Yeah.
and I think there's a fairly good culture of it in science, at least directed studies, where
Yes.
you get to integrate a lot of your knowledge
Yep.
in, a topic that you're passionate about.
That's right.
You find a supervisor who's willing to do it.
Yeah.
There seems to be quite a few of those coming to my office.
Yes.
great for the student, right? It's a way to integrate what you learn.
It is. We have a directed studies as well. I think almost no students take it, unless there's a reason because they can't get a particular requirement. Yeah, but that's exactly where students who might not want to do the honors, they don't want to go on to graduate school, but they still want to have that culminating experience. Directed studies is a perfect opportunity. I wonder how we could encourage more students to do that. Ed McDonald has a public history course, I know. In at least one of the banquets at the end, I think Ninian LeBlanc used to give a little speech about how to become a good alumni member. I thought that was extremely clever. Yeah, anything else? Well, we do have some courses. We do have we have career counseling, of course, in student services. And we have a lot of sort of one-offs. And my sense in doing this work through the Faculty of Arts is that there's much more going on than any one of us knows about. But that we tend, here's the old term again, right, to put them into silos so we aren't sure. Now, if we're not sure what we're doing across campus, how will our students know what their options are for the fourth year? So here are some things that other universities do that we might think about. A lot of colleges, and these are primarily colleges in the States, although there were a few senior year experience ones in programs in Canada as well. Muhlenberg is probably an example of the most common way to deal with the senior year experience, and is also the cheapest. They have essentially a website. And the website is a portal that directs students to all the things that they might want to think about in that senior year. If we do nothing else, we should probably do that, right? And they do have things like a last lecture, and they have a link to their career counseling, links to things like resume writing and the very practical stuff that maybe we don't want to deal with. But it's a very useful page. But they haven't done anything more than that. Some universities have a university-wide capstone course. So Kennesaw State University has something called the Senior Experience. The first class for the rest of your life. I like that tagline for it. But it's an option. So students may take it if they like. It's essentially a directed study course which has a component of transition in it. So essentially you're choosing a subject that you're really passionate about, and you're working on John Bunyan, but you're also looking back at your own skills that you developed, and you're looking forward, and Jane is laughing at me for my Bunyan. There are universities, though, like Bard College. I'd like to visit Bard and see how this actually works in practice. They have a university-wide senior year experience, and they do have a good, really good senior year handbook. So all the stuff that seniors should use is on PDF for them. But every student completes a senior project. Every student has a faculty supervisor. And there are very specific guidelines. And there's a board that meets to evaluate them. And so every student has that capstone experience.
How big a school is that?
Bard is a small school. That's right. Yes, that's right. I don't think it has professional schools either. I'm not sure about that. But even if there's not a university-wide senior year principle, there are a lot of places, a lot of faculties or individual departments that have courses that essentially do that same thing. So the two that have really been foundational for a lot of the work in Canada on the senior year experience are both in sociology and anthropology departments. They are in Guelph and at Dalhousie. And in fact, this is the course description from Guelph, which was really influential on Jane and myself when we were putting together our capstone course. Fred Evers there has a really good book as well on competencies that students need to get before they leave university, and this is his baby. It caught on, and the one at Dalhousie now, the capstone class for SOSA majors and double majors, again, aimed not at the best of the best. It's aimed at the majors, run-of-the-mill majors who would not otherwise do honors. So there are individual courses, and you can find them all over the place. No matter what your discipline is, you can find a capstone type course. Here's one from history, for example, that does all of these things, that attempts perhaps just the integration, perhaps just that sense of transition. Some are merely to get you to that next step, and some, like Jane and mine, attempted to do all four at once, right? We were trying to do transition, integration, celebration, and the other thing all at the same time. But I think even if we don't get to that stage in a careful way of having either a university-wide senior year experience class, or we have courses in individual departments, there are things that we can do when we're pretty sure that we have some seniors that use those four principles, and that can address it for third-year students as well as for our seniors. One of them is a really simple one. It's called Unpacking an Assignment. You may have heard the idea before of the meta-assignment. So someone hands in an assignment, and then they have to write about how they did the assignment. And it's a reflection, but it also tells you very interesting things about where they struggled, what they're most proud of. So this is a kind of meta-assignment, except it's very specific. What I ask students to do, either by themselves or in groups, is to figure out what they had to do in order to complete the assignment. And they think, they're handing in an essay on John Milton's Paradise Lost, right? But when they start unpacking that and they start to realize they had to do research, well, what did you have to do to be able to do? They had to figure out which was good and which was bad. They had to sift through for reliability. They had to write, they had to edit, they had to manage time. Sometimes they had to work in groups. So when they start unpacking the assignment, they start to realize how many of those, to go back to the HRDC website again, really marketable skills they're doing in order to hand that assignment in well. If you want to go to the next step, you ask them, which ones are you good at? The ones who hand in the assignment late, they're not so good at time management. Some of them are struggling with research, but really their strength is in editing. So they can start to sift through where their strengths are as well. And the other, you can see that this is what I had to mark when I came back from Cairo. These are my learning portfolios from Shakespeare. So I've gotten really excited about the idea of using portfolios in classes in place of exams. But the idea of portfolios really works well for the seniors. In the class that Jane and I taught, we had one of the major assignments was a skills portfolio. The students had to look back at all of what they'd done in their undergraduate experience. They had to essentially determine what their strengths were, but they had to show evidence for it. And what they had at the end was a thoughtful, reflective, and evidence-based object that essentially was their 4 years. And the lovely thing is that I really want, when I talk about this sort of thing, I want an example to show people and pass around. They won't let me keep them. This is an assignment they want back. It's also an assignment they use, by the way. They take these to job interviews, and they say, well, we need someone who will work well in groups. Well, I do. In fact, if you want to see evidence for this, you can turn to tab number C, and you'll see this. So some way of getting students to do portfolios, either for an individual course, that'll work, or for the whole of their work. Those are things that are smaller scale. And if you're thinking of getting started, there's a new green guide. You may know this lovely series that comes out of the Society for Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. Green guides are little, they boil down a lot of research so you can get to it really easily, and they cost $10. But since I'm the first one to be speaking on the subject, I do want to take the liberty of addressing the issue of student engagement a little bit. Jim has already given a wonderful introduction to the topic of student engagement. And we may find that it's a wonderfully useful term because it's so broad. It can encompass so many things. And that can also be dangerous, right, in what's now a really good educational buzzword, because it can encompass too much. NESE, of course, didn't start this. All they're doing is doing a survey of those things that other people have shown help to engage students. And what they point out is that engagement means two things. It's the amount of time and effort that students put into things, we don't really control that so much. But the part we can control is the context, the institutions, the courses, the environment that will encourage students to become engaged. So those are the two things that they talk about as important in engagement. Even if you find yourself a little unsure about a definition of engagement, you probably know what it looks like. Engaged, disengaged. Do you need that again? Engaged, disengaged. Mind you, looks can be deceiving, of course. What's on Thursday at the Wave? Really difficult math problem. Need to concentrate. But, basically, those are the extremes. We know what it looks like. We know what it sounds like when our students are leaving class and they're still talking about what they were doing during the class. So all NESI is trying to do, all the national survey is doing, is pulling together the stuff that we already knew worked and grouping it, of course, into, and this won't be news to any of you, 5 benchmarks. Where does the senior year experience fit here? The lovely thing is, just like the first year experience, it cuts across all of them. So one of the benchmarks is level of academic challenge. Well, yeah, all of this, the focus on independent study or honors or a final project, absolutely. Faculty-student interaction, all the things that people talk about in the senior year experience, increase that connection. Active and collaborative learning, yes. Supportive campus environment, absolutely, particularly if we put some more effort into the career counseling, the transition to the next stage. But the 5th one is the one where, it's almost like a little ad for the senior year experience. Because if you look at that list on their website, you'll see that the very things that people do elsewhere, that people talk about with the senior year experience, are listed there. Connecting to professors' research, internships, service learning, capstone courses. In fact, they pull this all together as any opportunities to synthesize, integrate, and apply their knowledge. Those are the 3 of the 4 principles, right, of the senior year experience. So when NESI is helpful to us, and when the idea of student engagement is helpful to us, all it's doing is pointing us in the direction of things we already know work, right? When it's not so helpful is when Maclean's gets a hold of it, and it's used in rankings, but rather than as a formative exercise. But all NESI is doing is telling us things that we already know. And it's an extended ad for the senior year experience. So I'm going to end my part of the talk and leave it open to you. If we were going to do this, if we were going to think about a campus-wide, should we think about a campus-wide senior year experience, what would we do? What would it look like? What would you like to see? What would you like to avoid? Charlene?
The California public school system has instituted a portfolio program that starts in kindergarten.
No kidding.
Yes. And I'm using portfolios for my students. And if that was something that was standard across the board, they would walk out of here with quite an extensive piece of work.
And by looking at it, they would know more clearly what they've got. When we tried to get our students to put together their portfolios, what we realized is that you have to tell them in first year to keep their stuff. Because otherwise they have celebratory bonfires, I think, at the end of term, and they don't hang on to the good stuff. That's interesting. So what if we started in University 100? I know Vicki does work with portfolios and encourage students to keep them all the way to the end and then look back. What else? What else would you like to see? Jane?
I think some kind of larger capstone course would be good. I know when we did ours, it was quite successful, but it was focused purely on English students. And I think one of the things that would be nice is many of those English students have also taken courses in other departments and other faculties on campus. So a way to bring more diversity into that process and allow everybody to sort of see what they've got. So whether it's a Faculty of Arts capstone, and then there's a Faculty of Science capstone, and they're separate, or if you did, maybe we start there.
Yeah.
And then imagine, could they be integrated? Is there a way to bring them together, or is it just too different?
Yeah.
But I think something that allows students to move beyond their own
The discipline,
which
yeah.
often gets sort of insular,
Yeah.
would be really a useful thing to think about working on.
Thank you. Yeah.
What about using the senior students to deliver guest lectures in first, second, and third year classes that they've
That's a
already-
wonderful idea. That's a wonderful idea. So senior students as guest lecturers in the first year classes that they've taken. That's a great idea. I love that sense of connectedness. That I haven't read about that one before, so that would be lovely. I see the connection the other way often. So there'll be alumni who are mentoring the senior students. How nice it would be to have both of those at the same time. The seniors mentoring the first, or teaching in the classes, and then the alumni coming back to help the senior students. Other thoughts? Or any questions about this? Yes? Chin.
I think probably when we talk about integration and reflection, I think we talk more about the content and student skills and thinking. One dimension I think probably should also think about is integrate students from different backgrounds.
Aha.
I think one thing we see from this is that student interaction with from different backgrounds, regardless whether that's racial, political, or religion.
Yes.
And we don't see that improvement from our first year students to senior year students.
Yes.
But I think for our senior year students, they already had that opportunity to get to know students different from them, and also learn different perspectives through their coursework and probably work from outside the classroom as well. I think probably then there's something we can do for graduate students to give them more opportunity to have a really serious interaction with the students from different backgrounds.
I love that idea. You're absolutely right. And that's, I can't think of how to do that at the moment, but I bet we could figure it out.
I have been thinking about that.
Yeah.
I think for students, they naturally tend to go with the student
I know.
Staff, right?
Yeah.
And so
From Morel. Other students from Tignish? Or,
yes,
yeah.
yes. And one way for us to do, I think instructors or professors have advantages that in classroom, when we are kind of forced to do group work, project,
yes.
we have that opportunity to have a deep interaction with the others.
That's a really nice suggestion. So it involves setting the groups in a purposeful way. Yeah. Lovely. Any other last thoughts or questions? Yes, Marlies.
The idea of having even faculty events, but just campus-wide events where fundraising needs to be done, and getting people together and really letting them show their skills.
Aha.
I think that would be really helpful.
Well, I was thinking about the fundraising is a neat connection. I was thinking about what Anne has done, Anne Braithwaite in Women's Studies, putting together the Blurring Borders conference. So the student conference to showing off what they've been doing and adding fundraising onto that would be kind of neat. Yeah, Jim.
I don't mean this to have any more or less weight than the other ideas, but it's interesting. The fall study break has been met once, and then, as you know, I've asked for input from people, and we did a little bit of research on what takes place at other universities in those that have a fall study break. York is an excellent example because York has had sort of a week for a long period of time, but they build in, and this isn't a specific experience, but the more logistics of it. They build in their week, or in our case, our 2 or 3 days, a set of events that focus students there. Huh. So I think for our winter break, we've almost sort of accepted the fact that, well, people go away.
Yeah.
And if we do that with the fall break, it'll fall into that same pattern. But if we start right away with thinking, what are the kinds of events that we might want to build into the 2 or 3 days in order to make this a set of experiences for students, whether that's a senior year or
Yeah.
the first year, I think we have an opportunity there to think a lot more creatively. We have the environment within which to allow some of these ideas to be expressed.
I think that's a great idea. We could have our disorientation week then. Well, I will let you get back out into the storm again, but I wanted to end by suggesting that, well, looking back to our earlier model of the last class for the last year, I'm always much more successful with a last class if I have it in mind from the beginning. If I'm thinking about what that last class is going to be from the first class, and I'm working my way towards it. And I think that if we think this way, it'll be helpful. But if we start our students in thinking about what their senior year is going to be like, then every year, not just the senior year, but the first, second, and third are going to be more meaningful. And I want to end with an invitation to a faculty learning community. I'm wondering whether there's any appetite for this. Probably would start next September after an initial meeting in the spring. But what happens in a faculty learning community is that we meet probably once a month, we have some readings, we talk about the idea, we see what we're doing, we see what other places are doing, and we see if we can build interests, ideas that would work at UPEI on the senior year experience. So if you're interested, let me know, and thank you very much for your attention.
Before some of you run away, I just wanted to give a little